This is Gridiron Graduates, a weekly podcast covering all things football. Episode number 2, Arby, No Horsie. Recorded June 10th, 2015.
Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Gridiron Graduates. How y'all doing? Hope you had a good week. I am Bill Rossetti, joined by my good buddy Ian Wharton. Ian, how you doing, my friend? How was your week?
I'm good, man. It's definitely that time of year over summer where things are a little slow. So of course we're dealing with a news cycle that's going to overreact to a little bit of news here and there, but it's a good time of the year to recharge a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. A little bit of a dead period, but it just gets so close. We're in the middle of OTAs, and you could feel it's right around the corner. So it's definitely a good time to jump back into football. Before we talk about our football, just want to give a shout out to the other football. Shout out to the men's and women's soccer teams for their big wins over the week. U.S. Women's team beating Australia 3-1, and then men beating Germany and the Netherlands. I don't know if you got to catch any of those games, Ian, but certainly exciting to watch, especially today against Germany.
No, I didn't have the chance to, but I was kind of following it a little bit on Twitter, so it's always nice whenever you're away from the TV to just check on Twitter and kind of see all the excitement going on.
Absolutely. And then, of course, American Pharoah winning the Triple Crown. That was certainly a sight to see, too, just especially with how big, just how much he won by, so that was amazing to watch. So, let's jump into it, shall we, Ian?
I think so.
I think the first thing we want to talk about, certainly one of the surprising bits of news over the week, was Anthony Davis becoming the fourth 49er this offseason to announce his retirement. He's joined Chris Borland, Patrick Willis, and Justin Smith as players who, between somewhat surprisingly and pretty surprising, decided to hang up the cleats. Davis, of course, missed 9 games last season with hamstring, knee, and concussion issues. What was your take on Anthony Davis when you heard the news?
Well, it was really surprising, and obviously this late in the game to throw a retirement or even like a sabbatical. I know some people had talked about him maybe taking like a year off and then coming back. This was a couple years ago. This was a top 5 to 10 right tackle in the NFL, and he struggled from injuries the last couple years, and I'd say the last 2 years he probably hasn't been the same player that he was in his first few years in the NFL. But nonetheless, it's still a damaging blow to the team. I mean, like you talked about, there's 4 guys that were leaders on this football team now, all of a sudden disappeared from that locker room, and you just have to wonder what's going on. I mean, even Eric Reed, about to be a second, third year safety. This is a guy that he even talked about possibly retiring. So I don't know what's going on in San Francisco. It's just very unusual considering everyone's known about these issues. Even with all the research out there now, you could argue that, yeah, there's more information to it now than there ever was before. But it's not like people play the game of football thinking that they'd never get hurt. I mean, it's just an assumed risk with the task. So it's surprising, and obviously we wish him well. And if he does come back in a year, hopefully he's the guy that 2 or 3, 4 years ago was a top 5 to 10 tackle at his position across the league. It's very interesting timing, I think.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, like we said at the top of the show, we're in the middle of OTA, so it's not like we're sitting here in February or March and he's deciding to hang it up. We're essentially 2 months from training camp. And I went back and watched a little bit of the Niners O-line, the last couple of days, just to kind of see how things were different between when Davis played and when he didn't. And there was certainly a pretty big difference between when Davis was in and then when they had to put Jonathan Martin in, a guy you know pretty well, following the Dolphins. Um, with Martin in there, it was just a completely different ball game, and Martin just never lived up to the expectations that we thought he would bring as a first round pick. So, you know,
Yeah, and that's definitely, I think, why teams put a big emphasis on character, football character,
mhm.
because a guy loved the game. And, when the Dolphins grabbed Jonathan Martin, he had just slid out of the first round into the early second round. And I think the big concern was, is this guy soft? And not necessarily on the field, although he did prove to be soft on the field as well. But off the field, can this guy handle an NFL locker room? And clearly, he had his issues in Miami, and he's bouncing around the league now because on the field, he's just not good enough. He's not good enough as even really a backup, because in a pinch, you need to be able to count on somebody to be at least somewhat dependable to not destroy the offense. But he's not been that guy. He's not been at all dependable to this point. So I think what they're going to do moving forward, I think Alex Boone, their former right guard, I think he's going to kick out to tackle, and I think you see Joe Looney step in to guard. That way they're still fairly strong in pass pro. I think it's optimistic to think that this is an offensive line that's going to be dominant. You've got Brandon Thomas sliding in at left guard. That's going to be an interesting thing, because Thomas was really talented at Clemson, but he's coming off a torn ACL. You never know what happens with lower body injuries. That stuff can, we say a year, but sometimes it takes a second year, because they have to build up the strength again, and not just, in the weight room, just playing strength and being comfortable with that, trusting his body. Marcus Martin, I was really high on him as a center, but again, you're looking at entering the season as a first-year starter, and it's moving a lot of guys around right before the season starts, and that could be a dangerous thing, especially for a guy like Kaepernick, who really needs a great offensive line.
Yeah, and you talked about Brandon Thomas, and I agree with you, especially with offensive linemen. Lower body is so important that, coming off an ACL injury, it's going to be interesting to see how Thomas plays. And I was with you. I definitely like Brandon Thomas myself coming out of Clemson. I thought getting him late third, where the 49ers got him, was pretty good value, considering, they had an opportunity to stash him for a year and give him a chance to recover. And, now we're going to see what he has. It'll be interesting to what they do with Eric Pierce, because there's talk that Pierce might get the first crack at right tackle. So you're probably going to see a little bit of a competition. Either way, this doesn't look like an offensive line that is going to be a strong unit. And, it's like you just said, with the type of offense they're going to run, and it's not like Colin Kaepernick was exactly dominant last season, so it's going to be really interesting to see not just the offense, but both sides of the ball, because they certainly have a lot of holes that they need to fill. I saw that Michael Wilhoit just, I think, signed like an exclusive rights tender or something like that, so at least he's in there. But is this looking like a down year for... I know there's talk that, obviously they've regressed, but is it possible that this team has regressed to the point that maybe they're picking top 5 in next year's draft?
Yeah, I mean, it seems kind of like a crazy question to ask, but I think it's a fair one. They had a really rough free agency, just losing guys. They still have a really good roster, though. Like, you look at their roster, and you can't help but say, well, they've got some really good players at key positions. But I just think it all comes back to Colin Kaepernick, and I'm not sure how you feel on Kaepernick, but I'm probably one of the lowest people on Kaepernick. I just, when everything broke down last season and he was asked to do anything more, he couldn't do it. And you can't say that he's raw. That's one thing that I just don't agree with him, is that, or at least inexperienced, because you look at him, and he played multiple years at Nevada, and it's kind of a big transition to San Fran in the NFL, but overall, this is a guy that his habits are ingrained. He's not going to just change who he is and how he plays at this point. This is who he is, and I don't think I don't think it's even fair to expect him to change anything drastically. So the question is, can he carry a mediocre offensive line until we're proven otherwise, a mediocre receiving group, again, until we're proven otherwise? It's a pretty deep backfield, but he needs an excellent running game to be effective, and I'm not sold on him. I'm really far from sold on Kaepernick, and I don't know about top 5, but then again, you look at their division and you say, can this team win more than one game in their division? I'd be surprised if they did anything more than one win in that division because, I mean, it's just so strong around them. Despite some talent on the roster, their secondary isn't great. Their defensive line isn't really great. Darnell Dockett's nice, but again, he's coming off an injury. Tank Carradine, we don't know much about him, although he used to have promising talent. And then again, we just talked about the offense. It's just, there's a lot of question marks. There's a new head coach. Tom Timsala does not seem to inspire any confidence from the outside in. So this really could be a team that's looking at drafting a new quarterback pretty high next year.
Yeah, and I'll be the first to admit, too, on Kaepernick that I was really high on him. I even wrote an article about 2 years ago saying, yeah, I really think Kaepernick's going to be a star, and he does this well, he does that well. That's starting to blow up in my face a little bit. So I'll be the first to admit that I'm probably going to be dead wrong on what I thought Kaepernick could be. But it's going to be interesting to see, and the nice thing is a lot of people will get to see Kaepernick, early on, because of course they have the second Monday night game, so if people are awake late enough, they can watch him. So now that we talked about Davis and gotten that out of the way, let's stay on the West Coast and let's talk about a guy who's probably feeling pretty good about himself, and that's Chargers defensive lineman Corey Liuget, who just signed a 5-year contract worth about $50 million, getting $30 million guaranteed. I know I've seen you post on Twitter when this news broke that you felt he's more replaceable than Eric Weddle. And it's an interesting question that why would they focus a lot on Liuget now? I mean, I'm not saying the contract that they gave him was bad or that they shouldn't have locked him up, but why give all this money now to Liuget and not even look at Eric Weddle, knowing that you have one of the best safeties in the NFL? Do they feel they have somebody behind Weddle that maybe they're happy about, or do they like some of the safeties in next year's draft class? I don't know. I just think it's really interesting that they're not even going to talk to Eric Weddle right now. What's your take?
Yeah, definitely agree along those lines. Because you have to look at this in two different directions. The first is the Eric Weddle issue. Weddle's a fantastic safety. I think he's a top 3 safety in the league, behind Earl Thomas and Devin McCourty. Just what he does for a defense, and they haven't had a lot of talent back there until last year, and he's been able to cover up for a lot of issues back there. To not even engage with him on a contract is ludicrous, because this is a 30-year-old player, and we know that they hit the cliff fairly quickly after that. However, he's got a game that's going to age well. He's an instinctive player. He's not a guy that's reliant on 4.3 speed to be great. He does other things that make him highly effective. And if you're looking at him, you should easily give him a 2 or 3 year contract guaranteed. So, to not even approach him about a contract and just let him hit free agency just says a lot about GM Tom Telesco. I think he's making a little bit of a mistake there. And then if you look at Corey Liuget, his contract is rich. I mean, there's no other way to look at it. And here's from the team perspective, here's what they're probably saying. He's 25 years old. He's not even in his prime yet. Let's lock him up to a 5-year deal where we don't have the specifics yet, I don't believe, where it's probably a 2 or 3 year guaranteed deal. And in the best case scenario, he fulfills this contract. Now, he's going to have to take some major jumps to get there, just to give an idea. So he has the seventh biggest contract of all defensive ends in the NFL. And he's far from the seventh best defensive end in the NFL. Even in a 3-4 front, it doesn't matter which way you're looking at it. He got a 5-year, $51 million deal. That's more money than Jerry Hughes got from Buffalo this offseason, and they're basically the same age. It's more than Everson Griffin got from Minnesota last season. It's more than what Carlos Dunlap got from Cincinnati 2 seasons ago. It's more than Jarrell Casey got from Tennessee this same offseason. It's just a lot of money for a player that's not that standout. When you look at the numbers, and I'm using PFF not for their overall grade, but just for their quarterback hurries. That's really what I want to focus on, because that's Legit's job. I mean, he's not really a great run stopper. They have him ranked as a top 10 run stopper, but just barely, and they have him as a top 10 overall in terms of quarterback hurries in a 3-4 scheme. So that's just the 3-4 scheme, and he's just barely in the top 10 there with 24 quarterback hurries. I think he's closer to above average than elite, and you have an elite playmaker on your defense at the most premium position in the secondary at free safety. And so, it's a rich contract, and I'm not going to hate the contract because Legit's a good player. He's not a bad player, and until we see the structure of the deal, it's not fair to blast that signing, I don't think, because we may end up seeing that it's only 2 years guaranteed. And then, at that point, that's not a huge deal. I mean, you can swallow whatever the penalty is if he doesn't work out past that, but it's just a lot of money at face value for a player that hasn't really produced like that type of player yet.
Mm-hmm. And I'll kind of echo what you said about safety being a premium position. I mean, we've seen the Seahawks the last 2 years now in the Super Bowl, and it seems like a lot of teams are trying to copy what they're doing in terms of trying to find that really good safety. Like a few years ago, safety was a decent position, but not necessarily as valued as it was today. Now that they have a guy like Eric Weddle, you would think that would be one of the first players they try to lock up. And again, it's just really interesting to me that they're not even talking. And if he hits free agency, then boy, some team, if it's not San Diego, is going to land a quality safety. And he's only 30 years old, so it's not like he's on the decline. He's still a solid safety, like you said, a very good one. Excellent in the run, excellent in pass. So yeah, we'll see. We've seen things change very quickly, but right now it's just a waiting game, I guess, with Eric Weddle. So wait and see. But I like Legion as well. And I agree. It's not a bad contract right now. Too many people still get in the habit of, looking at the total face value of the contract, saying, "Oh, $50 million. Well, that's a lot of money," but they never look at, they never dig deep into it. And you're right. We still have to wait on the actual specifics. So that'll be interesting to see. But he's certainly become one of the, I guess I'll say, like one of the linchpins of this defense, along with Melvin Ingram, and I guess you can throw Manti Te'o in there if you want to, but certainly one of the anchors of the defensive line, I guess, is more what I want to say. So certainly not a bad idea to lock him up.
And real quick too is the focus on 2016 offseason, receiver Malcolm Floyd announced that he's going to retire after this season, and you're already looking at a new deal for Phillip Rivers, and you're looking at a new deal for your best defensive player, Eric Weddle. It's going to be a very interesting offseason, I think, in San Diego. If that team doesn't win, is there going to be pressure to basically start anew? Maybe not necessarily with the coaching staff. I think McCoy has done a nice job there. He hasn't done a great job because obviously that was a team in line for the playoffs late last season, and they just couldn't get it done. But I think it's an interesting discussion, although I think that's going to be a much more explosive offense moving forward with Stevie Johnson added and Melvin Gordon added.
Yeah, and I'm excited to watch Melvin Gordon, and it's clear San Diego really wanted Melvin Gordon, that they were willing to trade up, even with a team like San Francisco, to get Melvin Gordon. The offensive line is still kind of so-so, but even with that kind of offensive line, I think Melvin Gordon can still do some good for San Diego. And we'll throw a little bit of fantasy in here. I think it's pretty clear that Melvin Gordon is probably going to be the best, or is at least in position to be the first rookie running back, and maybe the first rookie overall taken, because, and we're just talking redrafts, we're not talking dynasty here, we're just talking regular redrafts, because TJ Yeldon still has, or not TJ Yeldon, sorry, Todd Gurley still has the ACL injury, though TJ Yeldon is probably going to get some opportunities in Jacksonville.
Would you let me ask you about that? I'm not a huge fantasy guy, so I play fantasy, but I'm not one of those fantasy experts. I definitely don't claim to be.
Mm-hmm.
I do fairly decent, but would you rather have, and I'm not considering draft position necessarily.
Right.
Would you rather have Duke Johnson, Melvin Gordon, or would you look at a guy like TJ Yeldon, and not necessarily first, but if you were to have one of those guys for this season, who do you think really does the best this year? Because I lean toward Duke Johnson.
And who we talk about? Duke Johnson, TJ Yeldon, and Melvin Gordon.
Melvin Gordon, yeah. Of those three rookie running backs, who do you think has the best season? Because each situation is so unique.
Yeah, exactly. All three, I think, are certainly in line. Yeldon, I'm kind of intrigued by, but it seemed at first like Yeldon was maybe going to get a good bit of the carries. A lot of talk was he could be the feature back, whatnot, but they still have Toby Gerhart there, and I think they still want to give him some of the carries as well. Before they took Duke Johnson, Cleveland's running back was a mess. I liked Crowell. I liked Crowell, but it just seemed like no one really wanted to take the running back job and run with it. So, and Cleveland's offense is going to be a mess anyway. Whether it's Josh McCown or Johnny Manziel at quarterback, I think they're going to run the ball a lot, especially with a new and a very inexperienced offensive coordinator in play. Duke Johnson certainly is intriguing as a guy that, maybe you take a late round flyer on, because, when we're talking these rookie running backs, obviously the focus is going to be on the other two guys you mentioned, and maybe Todd Gurley. Duke Johnson's probably going to be available in the later rounds, so maybe you take a chance on him, and maybe something happens with Terrence West or Isaiah Crowell, and Duke Johnson gets his opportunity. And I like Duke Johnson. He's a shifty back, very very fast, and he's playing behind a good offensive line. I mean, for as much grief as we give Cleveland, their offensive line is still one of the better offensive linemen. Or let me rephrase that: one of the best groups of offensive line. Joe Thomas, we know, is a stud at left tackle. Joel Bitonio had a great rookie season at left guard. Alex Mack, as unhappy as he is in Cleveland, is still one of the better centers. So he's certainly Duke Johnson's certainly a guy that, if he's given the opportunity, can certainly run with it and can be a guy like a C.J. Anderson, a guy who no one expected much of anything and can just explode. And I'll even throw a couple other rookies in there. I'll even throw in Amir Abdullah. I think a lot.
I like that. I like his fit a lot there.
Because who's his main competition right now? Joique Bell. Now, I like Joique Bell,
right?
But he can't be a featured back. He's got to have somebody to spell him. And Abdullah is a great guy to come in, take a few carries, and we know the home run hitter that Abdullah can be. I'm picturing that run he had. I forget who it was against. I think it was very early in the season. What was that against? Not McNeese. McNeese State. I think it was.
Yeah.
Essentially run the game or win the game. So he can be like that. I don't know if I want to say like that Reggie Bush like player, but certainly another player that can. He just needs the opportunity, and once he gets it, he can definitely go far. So there you go, a little bit of fantasy talk for you.
It's definitely that time of year.
So we'll certainly have some more fantasy talk as the week goes on. Hopefully, we'll get some fantasy guests in here, help you dominate your draft. Moving on, we'll doing pretty good here, I think, Ian. I think we're going to move on to your boys now, the Dolphins. They certainly got bit by the injury bug, as Devontae Parker, their first-round pick, suffered a foot injury and is expected to be out 8 to 12 weeks, which means if he's out the full 12 weeks, you're pretty much right up to week 1 now. You're about 3 months from now. So, how does this hurt Parker's development as far as this rookie season goes? When he comes back from this injury, how long do you think is it going to take him to get up to speed? And is it kind of fair, or is it too much of a stretch to kind of compare his situation to what we saw last year with Odell Beckham?
It's really interesting because I've done some digging on this, and obviously I know people within the organization. And this was really surprising because normally what happens in this situation and why you would get this done. So what happened to Parker is in his 5th metatarsal, he had a screw replaced. And normally that'll happen if he's feeling discomfort, or if anything popped out or was re-aggravating during practice or whatever. And it's not uncommon to have this redone. So what's interesting about it, though, is they'll usually do a bone graft whenever, without getting too doctorish. This is just what people, some doctors have told me on Twitter and such. They'll do a bone graft to make sure that everything is fine. But he didn't have that done. So from the vibe I got was that this was just super precautionary. Like, if they even had the smallest concern, they just wanted to get this done just so that for the long term, he is going to be taken care of and there's not any worry. On one hand, that's kind of good, I guess, to hear. I mean, it's always kind of a red flag, I think, whenever you hear, like we said, lower body injuries, especially with a playmaker that's so reliant on his footwork to be effective. But it doesn't sound like this was a major thing. So I think he's going to end up being back probably well before that time frame, that 12 weeks. I think he'll be back at some point, maybe by the end of the preseason. It goes both ways because you don't want to be too nonchalant about it because ultimately it is an injury to the foot, like I said, and any type of surgeries I think should be taken seriously. However, um, it wasn't like a re-injury. It was just something that he had a little discomfort and they wanted to make sure that it doesn't get worse. So, when he comes back, he's going to definitely fight for that number one receiver position with the Dolphins, but they're looking to kind of build what Green Bay did. Green Bay had 4, 5, even 6 interchangeable receivers for the most part for years. Until Jordy Nelson broke out. And Jordy Nelson breaking out wasn't in the plans. So it just kind of happened, and obviously you're very happy about that. So, whether or not he can separate himself like that, we'll see. But I think he's going to come back and he's going to compete right away and get a fair amount of snaps. I think Jarvis Landry is still going to be the number one receiver on that team, and then I think Parker probably becomes the number 2 receiver by the end of the season.
Awesome. Good info, and certainly for the listeners out there, Ian is definitely a guy to go to as far as the Dolphins go. He and Oscar Hazel also do a pod that pretty much focuses on the Dolphins. So anytime you could talk Dolphins, Ian's definitely a go-to guy. So from what you're saying, it sounds like it's not completely related to the foot injury he suffered at Louisville. Is that right?
No, it is that same injury. They're just going back and replacing one of the screws.
Okay.
Yeah, and the worry is that just based off of what, again, some have sent me. Injury Predictor on Twitter is a really good tool. He has some very unique work, and of the 4 receivers that had the same injury as Parker before their first season in the NFL, all 4 of the guys ended up injuring themselves quite badly at some point within the first 2 years of that injury, returning to that injury. So now one of the guys was Julio Jones, who's missed 15 games over 4 seasons, but he's also an elite player, so you kind of deal with the injuries a little bit differently. And then also Demaryius Thomas, who tore his Achilles and also had a knee injury as well. So, I'm sorry, he tore his ACL. I don't think he tore his Achilles. He tore his ACL and had another knee injury at some point too. So, and obviously he came back and he's fantastic. So, it's just a concern because you just want to try to avoid as many risks as possible. It's just interesting to watch moving forward because I don't know, honestly, I don't know what it all means. Like, it's hard for me as someone that's not a doctor to sit here and act like I know exactly what all this stuff means. I certainly don't. It just all adds up, and it says I'm glad that from the team's perspective, I'm glad that they're taking this conservative approach because the Dolphins have a cakewalk in 5 of their first 6 weeks of the season. Like, if they don't end up at least 4-2 from the first 6 weeks, then Joe Philbin should just be fired right on the spot because they should be able to walk right over their opponents in the first few weeks. So Parker's not going to be needed right away. They have a pretty good receiving core now. If Parker's needed to win any of those games, that's actually a really big indictment on what they've done this offseason. But I don't think that'll be the case.
Just to kind of let the listeners know, he mentioned the first couple games. Their first 2 games are at Washington and at Jacksonville, so those are certainly winnable. And then they've got back-to-back home division games against the Bills and the Jets. That Jets game, of course, being out in London. I found it interesting that you mentioned how this team wants to be like the Packers, and now they have a former Packer in Greg Jennings. I think it's certainly going to be fun to watch the Dolphins, at least their passing game. I've really been happy with the improvement that Ryan Tannehill has made. specifically in the last year. And now that he has a great stable weapon, even without Devontae Parker, once you add Parker, obviously it's going to be even better. But even without him, I think it's a solid stable of receivers. You certainly can tell that the Dolphins focused on surrounding Tannehill with weapons. Trading for Kenny Stills, signing Jordan Cameron, the tight end, and then obviously drafting Devontae Parker in the first round. So it's definitely starting to get to the point where there are going to be no more excuses. Joe Philbin has certainly been very conservative the last couple of years, and it's cost him. I'm sure you will agree with this. 2 years ago, Dolphins should have cakewalked into the playoffs. They're sitting, I think, at 8-6. Easily could have got to 10-6, made the playoffs. Lose their last 2 games, 8-8, out of the playoffs. And I think this is what Bill Lazor's second year as offensive coordinator.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So another year under him, and I think it was the Dolphins they talked about when I found the story that said they want to attack the middle of the field more, which is certainly possible with a guy like Jarvis Landry. So this should be a team that should be able to move the ball. Can they? I guess I'll just ask this: can they unseat the Patriots atop the AFC East, or is a wild card more realistic for this Dolphins team this year?
I think they can unseat the Patriots. I don't think they will. I think the wild card is honestly just a little bit more realistic. Just because until I see it from the Patriots, it's just really, really hard for me to sit there and bet against them.
Yeah.
It just doesn't
That's
seem
my
smart.
thought exactly too. For as bad as the Patriots offseason has been, until proven otherwise, they are the kings of the AFC East. And Bill Belichick will find a way. Like even if Tom Brady is suspended for 4 games, this team will be 2-2 at the worst through those 4 games. I mean, one of those games against Jacksonville. They might lose the opener to Pittsburgh, but still, they should be 2-2 at worst. And once Tom Brady comes back, it'll just be smooth sailing. We saw what they were at 2-2 last year. Everyone was writing them off, and I don't need to say anything else about what happened. So,
Right.
But that's certainly a topic for another day, because certainly as the season draws near, we're going to start previewing each of the teams and previewing each of the divisions, and we'll also be talking some college. I think soon we should start previewing some of these college conferences. I know you've written a bit about the Big Ten for Optimum Scouting, so maybe I'll use this as a little bit of a teaser. Throw some college in here. What are some storylines you're looking forward to in Big Ten? I know this is a bit of an impromptu question for you, but I like putting you on the spot a little bit here. But as far as Big Ten football is concerned, what are you most looking forward to?
I definitely want to see. Well, the first thing obviously is Ohio State. That's a team with just a ridiculous amount of talent. I think that they're going to cruise to a second title in a row. I honestly don't see that team having many issues. Maybe a couple games here and there, but I think that's a team that's just way too talented. Way too talented. Yeah, like you could replace the worst team in the NFL and with the Ohio State Buckeyes, including the coaching staff, and I think that team could probably win a couple games in the NFL. They've got 2 quarterbacks that could start for numerous teams in the NFL, so it's going to be fun to really see them, and are they as dominant as they should be? How many yards does Ezekiel Elliott run for? That's what I'm going to be really watching, and as well as the quarterback development. Also, I'm going to be looking at Penn State. Can Christian Hackenberg turn it around? I talked to an NFL guy a couple weeks ago, and I brought up Hackenberg because I'm a big Jared Goff fan, quarterback from Cal.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not so much of a Hackenberg fan, just based off of last year. I watched 10 of his games. I honestly did not think that Hackenberg was even a day 2 pick, just based off of the film, just strictly based off this film. He's
Right.
really poor decision making, really struggled at times reading defenses and adjusting to a new offense. And I know there's a lot more to factor in there. And his freshman season was a complete 180. So I personally don't know how to balance that. It's very difficult to sit there and say, I know exactly who Christian Hackenberg is right now.
Right.
So if he can put up a great season in year 2 of a new system, he's got a little bit more help around him. Hopefully the offensive line plays a little bit better. That would certainly make things easier for us to evaluate. Who is Christian Hackenberg? That's what I want to see. Is he Matt Stafford, or is he potentially a much better version of that? He obviously got tremendous arm talent, so I think that I don't need to see more of his arm. I need to see more of mentally, is he NFL ready? Other than that, I'm really, just kind of touch on some things real quick. Michigan State, obviously, I'm excited to see Connor Cook. I think that's always a fun team because they're so well coached. Michigan's going to be interesting to see. I don't think they're going to do great. I think they probably get to 9 wins this year. Their quarterback situation is just a huge question mark. If it's going to be Shane Morris or whoever it's going to be, can they produce enough offense? And do they even have much defensive talent left? A couple of my favorite players on that defense have left to the NFL. So, the Big Ten's going to be fun. I love the Big Ten. I really do. I think there's a lot of talent in that conference. They tend to do well in the bowl games. It's a gritty conference, and I appreciate that. I appreciate that they're working with a little bit less sometimes. So I'm excited for their season. I'm definitely going to be watching all the teams. I'm not working with Optimum Scouting in such a big role this year, just because of time commitments on my own side. But I'm always going to be watching that conference closely.
Absolutely. I just want to mention too, we talked about Hackenberg. I was at the Blue-White game, and I thought Hackenberg was okay. I guess nothing spectacular. And obviously with spring games, you really have to take it with a grain of salt, because obviously the offense that Hackenberg is leading isn't exactly going up against top-notch competition. We're talking the second-string defense here. But, like you said, last year was really a down year for Hackenberg. It was really tough to sit there and watch Penn State games. Just watch their offense just slug through all these games. It was amazing, some of the games they were even able to win, because of how poor the offense was. The defense really had to step through, and for Penn State fans, thank God the defense did. Offensive line was atrocious, so now that they have a couple of recruits along the offensive line, hopefully that's going to help keep Hackenberg upright. You have the receivers back in Eugene Lewis, who will always be Geno Lewis to me. I have to say that. For all my local listeners, everyone who knows me and knows when I followed Wyoming Valley West, my Hazleton guys will know that. He will always be Geno Lewis to me, not Eugene Lewis. Actually, wait, I think I completely screwed that up. He's Geno Lewis now, but he's Eugene Lewis, because he's actually a former high school quarterback. He was actually a high school quarterback at a school that's about a half an hour from where I am. So certainly fun to watch him. Fun to watch him do well at Penn State. But yeah, I actually just screwed that up. He goes, because I'm looking at Arlett's right now, and it has him as Eugene Lewis, and that's what I knew him as in high school. now he goes by Geno Lewis, but he will always be Eugene Lewis to me. But I guess those in the NFL scouting world at this point are going to know him as Geno. But you have him, and you have Deshaun Hamilton, who had a pretty good freshman season last year. So hopefully they can keep that going. It'll be interesting to see how they replace the tight end position now that Jesse James is off to the NFL, who I think is going to be a very nice tight end. I think the Steelers got a good pick out of him in the 5th round. I know they were probably trying to go after Max Williams, but couldn't get him. Baltimore got him, but Jesse James is a very nice consolation prize. I think that's not being fair to Jesse James calling him a consolation prize, but I think he's going to fit in well with the Steelers and maybe take over for Heath Miller eventually. But like you said, there's certainly a lot of stuff to watch in the Big Ten. Michigan State will be interesting to see how they replace Jeremy Langford, and obviously talked about Connor Cook. We'll see how Rutgers and Maryland do in year 2 as Big Ten members, and overall it should just be another fun conference to watch. And again, like we talked about the NFL divisions, hopefully down the line we'll start previewing some of these conferences. Definitely the SEC too. So it'll be interesting to kind of look up what's going on there and kind of get our thoughts and see what you guys as listeners and viewers think. So I think we talked long enough, Ian. What do you think? That was a fun night.
I think we did good.
Yeah. So hope you guys enjoy the show. And until next time, from my man Ian Wharton, I am Bill Rossetti. We are the Gridiron Graduates. And we'll see you next time. Bye.